Today we're focused on a report card from Bob Lutz on the performance of Tesla versus the performance of GM and their $35 billion spending plan between now and 2025. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you'd like helpful hints on trading, investing, as well as special programming, we invite you to join us on Patreon. At the highest level, we actually do a daily show that prior to open of market that might be helpful in your process. We also want to, again, encourage you to like and subscribe if you enjoy. So news came out yesterday that GM had decided to announce that they'd be investing $35 billion by 2025 in their efforts to make a transition to electric vehicles. So I was sort of fascinated by this because where we started with this whole process of Bob Lutz and GM was, as you know, Bob Lutz is the one who canceled of GM. Yeah, obviously he worked at a number of different companies, was the one who actually canceled the initial electric vehicle that encouraged Elon Musk to get started after watching how much customers enjoyed those EVs. So it seems appropriate for us to periodically come back to what GM is up to, because there are other manufacturers that kind of follow GM's lead in terms of decisions they're making. So in particular today, what we wanted to kind of do is maybe go through a list of kind of what's been going on and where we're at. And therefore, we could probably give a report card for this. And we're particularly excited to do this given that we're focused on Tesla's transformative methods globally. So as you know, the biggest thing that happened was this $35 billion announcement by GM. After I heard this, I was kind of surprised. And the reason is that, according to Bob Lutz, at this point, 2.5 years, 3 years ago, he indicated that you really couldn't rely on anything Elon Musk had to say about what would actually happen. Instead, you could rely on what GM or GM executives had to say because they had the resources and experience and automotive technique to execute whatever they said they were going to do. So the biggest sort of how is this going to affect thing that came up is that Bob Lutz had indicated that by 2021, GM would have as many as 20 new models to compete with Tesla, and that all the other OEMs globally would have similar numbers, so Tesla would face an onslaught of competition relative to the EV marketplace. Now, we fast forward 3 years since the nightmares related to the Model 3 and other challenges Tesla has had, and one of the things that I found very strange about the report card process on this, where I kind of give Tesla an A, maybe even an A+, and I give GM a D-, is the fact that if you look at the different iterations of all of Tesla's vehicles, you could basically say there are the number of iterations of Teslas relative to engine size, et cetera, is approximately 21, if not more. So while GM has perhaps one vehicle, the Bolt, that's been out there, that's sort of at the end of its life cycle, and they have a couple of new ones coming on, there's this huge problem, which is there's a large number of manufacturers who have a lot of jobs that depend on their success that are getting very little traction at this point, even if they have some very nice products that are coming in off the drawing board. So I kind of wanted to review this because the next question is, well, what happened to the 100 different iterations of EVs that were supposed to challenge Tesla at this point for the lead? And the answer is they're not here yet. And the question is, why? I think the best illustration, or there are a number of reasons for this, but one would have to argue that the supply chain process related to EVs has sort of caught the major OEMs by surprise. What Bob Lutz indicated is that they would simply go to the largest manufacturer in the world, in this case LG, order up the batteries necessary to compete with Tesla, and that Tesla would be done simply because Elon and company would be in a tough position because they now owned all of these factories, and those factories would become somewhat anvils around their neck. And so this kind of has not played out as expected by GM because, number one, Elon found out when they initially went out to get large-scale batteries in the 2010, 2011 range, they were informed that if they wanted 100,000 vehicle worth of lithium-ion batteries for their vehicles, they'd be stuck because the entire world supply of lithium-ion batteries equaled 100,000 vehicles worth of batteries, and they were already committed for laptop and other manufacturers at that point. So this is an illustration of one of the major supply chain challenges that the larger OEMs are having right now. As you know, we're going through a process where the supply chain challenges first related to batteries, lithium ion, cobalt, all these different commodities that now have to find large enough inventory to drive production at a high scale, and that doesn't exist right now. The second thing, so clearly supply chain challenges is an issue. The next thing that's a challenge is obviously motors in terms of Elon/Tesla leading the motor delivery, so they're getting better range out of the same size battery packs that others might have. You know, we could keep going through the supply chain, but in essence, what we can, on a global basis, say is at this stage, perhaps we're at stage 2 of the process, Tesla/Elon's are the winners at this point in the process. So there's an issue that's been popping up that I've been watching for to figure out what's going to happen is where are we going in the next iteration of batteries, both in the batteries that we're using. Theoretically, we're going to solid state or some other type of battery that offers better performance than what we're doing with lithium ion. But there's another problem that's going on with batteries right now, which is you might want to call it vertical integration / economies of scale. So the problem that's occurred is that Elon built his own factory, and he sells directly to consumers through his own shops. Now this creates a big problem. Because the large OEMs globally are making a bunch of money off of ICE vehicles, particularly large ICE vehicles, they can live through the transition to electric by feeding off their old products, something Tesla is not able to do. So what we see going on right now is that pretty much electric vehicles have been a loss leader for the large OEMs as they work to make this transition. And this sort of easy transition process shrinks as a possibility the more vehicles that Elon/Tesla produces. So now we have an interesting situation that's jumped off. As you know, VW/Mercedes/ think of any of the large OEMs, have all decided to model Tesla's process of sharing the battery factories they're building and the cost of building those factories with large manufacturers of batteries. So Tesla, in Tesla's case, Panasonic is the partner, and then LG is partnered with a number of auto companies, and Cattle has done the same thing. So there's a number of players out there that have decided to model off of Tesla's joint venture as a way to reduce operating costs. So we might want to call this the second iteration of what's going on. The third iteration is that Tesla's actually built its own small battery factory adjacent to the factory. So this allows them to do specialty batteries for specialty vehicles that might come out, for example, like the Semi. But they've also partnered Panasonic to build a line to be able to produce these batteries on a larger scale. And in theory, if that line is existing, there will be a transition to the new battery, the 4680, over time, where those lines that are currently running other battery products, 2170, for example, are going to be able to make transitions over to the new form factor, i.e. the 4680. So this creates a very interesting challenge, because if you're building your own battery at your own facility, in the case of Tesla in this case, you now create a huge problem for competitors, because they actually are paying few outsiders. So particularly on the battery pack, which is your highest cost item, if in fact Tesla does not have an outside supplier and that battery is being produced in-house, the margin that an external supplier might expect to get is no longer having to be paid by Tesla, which means that they can either take that in the form of higher profits, or they can use it as a way to be able to offer a price to consumers that's so low that it's below the cost of competing products. So I expect, because of the move Tesla made, that all the OEMs are going to have to scrap the plans they have for constructing and building battery plants and move on to Tesla's newest model, because they're going to be at a cost disadvantage in the next round of this battle. And, the other question is, and BMW sort of highlighted this in the decision not to move forward with their own production, they're really waiting to find out who the winner is going to be of the battery sort of wars, and then they can buy and build production to that newest form factor. Well, I think this is a great idea for BMW, and it's kind of the program being used by all the other large manufacturers, including obviously VW being the biggest. And the problem with that is that if the solution you're going to provide is 2 or 3 years away in the form of that new factory being built, how exactly are you going to compete now? You can't tell consumers wait for 2 or 3 years before you'll get a vehicle if they can walk into the showroom and pick up Teslas now. So this is why I would say that there's this huge issue going on, which is the OEMs have to do or spend on R&D in two fronts. They're fighting on the EV front, as well as having to continue to do R&D on their existing ICE vehicles. And so they're diffusing their capital across a broad range of issues, which means they have a harder time doing a good job and delivering sort of the profits that is expected by shareholders. So I believe that this is why I'm giving Tesla an A in this situation, and GM and others, particularly GM, a D-. GM could have gotten into this game. They delayed it for 2 years before they started the process of co-building a plant that might be competitive with Tesla. So in theory, that first plant won't be an issue, but how much scale can you get from one facility to allow you to be a valid competitor in the space? The $35 billion that's been discussed is great, but if you start today, you're still 2 to 3 years away from that facility delivering scale. And from what we understand, there's only one factory for GM being put up, while VW and others have multiple factories that they're actually co-putting up right now. So I just think that we're in a dangerous position for Ford, GM, and all these other manufacturers, because they attempted to use the OEM process and supply chain process of yesteryear, combined with, in particular, the supply chain process that they use, and the vertical integration process that served the industry well for the last 30 or 40 years, is basically falling apart as Tesla more and more vertically integrates. And this limits the number of suppliers that are available with solutions that they're selling to others for those large OEMs to buy. And now they've got to go reverse engineer or R&D their own solutions. And that takes a lot of money and time, which adds to them being slower to market. So my overall take on this whole situation is that, as Bob Lutz said, there's going to be at least 21 new products coming out from GM in 2021. And all those products would flood the marketplace and make it difficult for Tesla to survive and succeed. The opposite has occurred, where Tesla can't make enough vehicles right now because there's such heavy demand globally. And as we have some new factories coming on for Tesla, I think it exacerbates the challenges for competitors because they just don't have the supply chain, particularly in the form of battery and other methods with which to respond. And I believe that there's a hope that these manufacturers had that consumers would lose interest in EVs and just stick with the ICE vehicles. But the value proposition presented by Elon and Tesla is so great that that has not happened. And the net result is there's a huge volume of Tesla cars being produced and new innovative vehicles that are now being ordered, and the Cybertruck in particular comes to mind. So hence, I have to say I give Tesla an A here, and I'm giving a D- to the folks at GM and other facilities because the products being presented have not been compelling. So even though they had a solution in the form of the Bolt, it wasn't a compelling piece. I do think that the new things that they have coming over the next year, for example, some of the Cadillac SUVs look good and seem to be ready to be competitive products. But we'll have to wait and see to see what the range is like, whether or not they build their supercharging facilities out to compete with Tesla in order to definitively say that they're not going to get blown away. So I'm actually hopeful that these firms all start to respond well to Tesla, because it'd be sad to see all those jobs lost at the same time. But it's not out of the realm of possibility, because there's a lot of decisions that have to be made in order to figure out what's going to happen with the Tesla relationship or Tesla competitive relationship. I guess one last note that I would like to make on all this is just the fact that one of the comments made by the folks at VW was that they were going to hire 6,500 engineers to help beef up their software solutions. And I thought this was obviously a good idea because it's such an important part of EVs. But one of the basic questions that's lurking out there is Tesla has chosen to use Linux and open system for the architecture of their most of the systems for the car. And this, I think, is an interesting problem, because if you have OEMs already committed to other types of software systems, if you will, you now have an added problem of you could spend a lot of money and have to go backwards and rebuild from scratch because you can't get the functionality you need delivered by proprietary systems, or basically anything that's not Linux is what I'm thinking about. There's a reason why Tesla chose that. So I would say that right now, if GM and others don't respond within the next year, maybe two, this is 23, heading into 24 in a big way, an effective way, by the time we hit 2025, Tesla will now have 6 factories delivering huge numbers of vehicles. And I believe that it'll be really hard to get consumers to switch because, yes, they have loyalty perhaps to a brand, but the Tesla solution will become so ubiquitous, you'll all of a sudden find that Tesla is one of the limited number of players that still exist, at that time point. Now, will others be around and still be able to stick around? Absolutely. But I just think that there's a tipping point where you have a large enough buyer base that you're no longer competitive. And I think that that is a lurking issue for a large number of companies globally. And so I thought it was interesting, the $35 billion number announced by GM, because, are you signaling to your suppliers you're ready? Are you trying to tell Tesla you're going to spend a lot of money? What is their program here? I think it's similar to what Bob Lutz talked about with 21 potential new products coming out, and then how those products hit Tesla will allow them to pull ahead, and that has not happened. And I just don't think large amounts of spending right now is how this race is going to be won. I think it's going to be take some risks. I think it's going to be definitely spending, but I don't think that folks can afford to wait too long. Otherwise, Tesla will establish too large a position where they cannot be unseated. So we look forward to updating you on this further. I'd have to say, when I was at the beginning of this process watching Bob Lutz several years ago, I thought that he had some valid points about the fact that these large companies like a VW, Mercedes, GM could spend a lot of money that Tesla could not to win in the marketplace. And it turns out that the large dollars have not proven to be the competitive advantage that a lot of people thought it would be. Hence the current, nobody knows what's going to happen to those companies as Tesla continues to grow rapidly. So we look forward to keeping you abreast of all this. Just a reminder, please take time to like and subscribe. We do have a few SpaceX shares, not that many, available at this point. You can contact us via private messenger on Facebook, or you can contact us off of Patreon if you'd like to join us. And so I really look forward to kind of what's going to be happening with this. Obviously, the stock price is starting to pop a little bit with some anticipated great numbers for the quarter driving it, and I think that's great. So we look forward to keeping you abreast of this. I frankly am hoping that the OEMs keep some of their share here as we transition into electric, because there are a lot of jobs that rely on them. But I'd have to say there's no guarantees, because they've been somewhat slow to the party, and because of its new technology situation, it's not as easy to close out new competitors, as they might have. At any rate, again, we wanted to thank you for joining us. Next, we move on to our health tips. Just a reminder, forest bathing is a good idea. Getting out into nature and getting some exercise is always a great idea. Also wanted to encourage you to not go to bed within 4 hours of eating, minimum 2 hours. Also wanted to encourage you prior to lovemaking to have a very small meal like a salad. It limits the amount of blood flow to your stomach, leaving all that blood flow available for other extremities. We also wanted to encourage you to only have fried foods once a week as a way to prevent type 2 diabetes. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss German, au revoir French, Lehitro Hebrew, Hoda Hafez Farsi, Strazviche, Russian, Nihama, Chinese, Konbanwa, Japanese, Heido, Swedish, G'day our friends in Australia, and in Jamaica we say, enough respect, walk good. Congrats on up stock price for Tesla for the week a little bit, and we really look forward to the next 2 weeks being very strong, heading into production numbers and then earnings. Have a great day. Bye for now. And again, thanks for joining us.